The great ship descended through the clouds above Earth, like a metal god, coming to deliver judgment. And every human who watched it knew that this day had been coming for 3,000 years. Ambassador Kethra of the Dominion of Veth stood at the observation window of her vessel, her 4 eyes scanning the blue and green planet below with a mixture of boredom and contempt. For she had done this many times before with many other species, and they all ended the same way, with tears and begging and the eventual silence of extinction. She was tall by the standards of her people, her scaled skin shimmering with colors that shifted between purple and gold, depending on her mood. And right now those scales were a steady, confident gold, because she knew exactly how this meeting would go. The humans had been a problem once, 3,000 years ago, when they first reached out into the stars with their primitive ships and their aggressive expansion. And the Galactic Concord had seen them for what they were, a young species with too much ambition and too little wisdom. The kind of species that started wars and consumed resources and threatened the peace that the elder races had maintained for 100,000 years. So the Concord had given them a choice: sign the Covenant of Stillness and agree to halt all military development, surrender all warships, and remain forever within their single solar system, or face immediate and total destruction. The humans had chosen to live, which Kethra had always found amusing, because what kind of life was it really? Trapped in a cage of their own making, watched over by Concord observers, forbidden from ever truly joining the galactic community as equals? For 3,000 years, the humans had been what the Concord called a protected species, which was a polite way of saying prisoners. And Kethra had heard all the jokes about them, the quiet ones, the tamed apes, the species that had been broken so thoroughly that they had forgotten they ever had. Tether's shuttle landed on the platform of Earth Station 1, a modest orbital facility that served as humanity's only point of contact with the wider galaxy. And she walked down the ramp with her guards flanking her, their weapons visible as a reminder of who held the power here. The human delegation was already waiting, and Kethra studied them with her 4 eyes as she approached. There were 5 of them, dressed in simple gray uniforms that bore no military insignia, because of course humans were not allowed to have a military. And at their head stood a woman with black hair streaked with silver and eyes that were dark and calm and gave away nothing. "Ambassador Kethra," the woman said, her voice steady and polite. "I am Director Yuki Tanaka of Earth's External Relations Council, and we welcome you to our station." Kethra did not return the greeting because there was no need for pleasantries when delivering death sentences. "I am here to deliver a message from the Galactic Concord," Kethra announced, her voice echoing through the receiving hall. "And you will listen, and you will understand that there is no negotiation possible." She activated the holographic projector built into her wrist, and a 3-dimensional image appeared in the air between them, the seal of the Concord. The 47 stars representing the 47 elder species who ruled the galaxy. "The Concord has voted," Kethra declared, "and the decision is final, for humanity's usefulness as a protected species has ended. And your system's resources are now required for the expansion of Concord territory, which means that you have 30 solar cycles to surrender unconditionally your planet, your stations, your people, everything, or you will face complete and total extinction." She paused, waiting for the reaction she had seen so many times before. She waited for the gasps of horror, the tears, the desperate questions about whether there was anything they could do to change the Concord's mind, the offers of tribute, the pleas for mercy, but none of that came. Instead, Director Tanaka simply looked at her colleagues, and something passed between them, a glance that Kethra could not read, an understanding that seemed to require no words. And then, impossibly, Director Tanaka smiled. It was not a nervous smile or a smile of denial or the desperate smile of someone trying to hide their fear. It was a genuine smile, the kind of smile that reached the eyes and changed the entire face. And Cathra felt something cold move through her chest, because this was not how prey was supposed to behave when the predator announced its intentions. 30 cycles, Director Tanaka said, and her voice was still calm, still polite, still perfectly controlled. That is very generous of the Concord, Ambassador. But I do not think we will need that much time. Cathra's scales flickered with confusion, shifting from gold to an uncertain green. You do not understand, she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. This is not a negotiation, and there is no alternative being offered. You will surrender or you will die, and those are your only options. Oh, we understand perfectly, said one of the other humans. A broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples and scars on his hands that looked old and deliberate. We have understood for 3,000 years, Ambassador. And we have been waiting for this day. Waiting? Cathra repeated, and she did not like the way the words sounded in this context. 30 cycles is more time than we need. Director Tanaka continued, and that smile had not left her face. We will need perhaps 3, maybe less. So you may tell the Concord that their message has been received and that humanity will provide its response very soon. Cathra stared at her, trying to find some sign of madness or delusion in those dark eyes. But there was nothing except calm certainty, and that was somehow more unsettling than any amount of tears or screaming would have been. You have no fleet, Cathra said. And she said it firmly because the intelligence reports were clear on this point. You have no weapons, no military infrastructure. Nothing but farms and schools and hospitals. We have watched you for 3,000 years, and we know exactly what you are, which is a broken species that forgot how to fight the moment you signed the covenant. Yes, Director Tanaka agreed pleasantly. That is certainly what it must look like from the outside. That cold feeling in Cathra's chest grew stronger. What is that supposed to mean? She demanded. Director Tanaka's smile widened just slightly. And for a moment, just a moment, Cathra saw something in those human eyes that made her scales shift to a color they had not shown in decades. A color that her species only displayed when they were genuinely afraid. It means, Ambassador, that you should deliver your message to the Concord and tell them exactly what you saw here today, Director Tanaka said. Tell them that you informed humanity of its impending extinction, and tell them how we reacted, and then wait. Wait for what? For our response. The meeting ended shortly after that, and Cathra walked back to her shuttle with her guards flanking her. And she told herself that the humans were simply in denial, that they would realize the truth of their situation soon enough, that their strange calm was nothing more than shock that had not yet transformed into despair. But she could not stop thinking about that smile. She could not stop wondering why, when facing the announcement of their own extinction, the humans had looked not frightened but almost relieved, as if they had been waiting for exactly this moment for a very, very long time. As her ship rose back through the clouds and left Earth behind, Cathra composed a report to the Concord High Command, and she included every detail of the meeting, including the smiles and the strange confidence and the unsettling claim that 30 cycles was more time than the humans would need. She did not know what any of it meant, but deep in a part of her mind that she did not like to acknowledge, a part that remembered the old stories about what humans had been before the Covenant, she was beginning to wonder if perhaps the Concord had made a terrible mistake. Not today, but 3,000 years ago, when they had chosen to cage these creatures instead of simply destroying them. What had humanity been doing for 3,000 years inside that cage? And why, when the cage was finally about to be opened, did they look so ready? The Concord High Command received Ambassador Cathra's report with laughter. Supreme Commander Vethanal, the oldest and most powerful of the Concord's military leaders, read the message aloud to his war council while his mandibles clicked with amusement. And when he reached the part about the humans smiling and claiming they would need only 3 cycles, the entire chamber erupted in sounds of mockery from a dozen different species. "The humans have gone mad," declared Admiral Zethkon, his massive form shifting in his specially designed chair. 3,000 years of captivity has broken their minds, and now they cannot even process reality when it is delivered to them. The War Council agreed, for they had all seen the intelligence reports, and the intelligence reports were very clear about what humanity had become. The reports showed farms stretching across entire continents, producing food for a population that had grown peaceful and soft. The reports showed universities where humans studied art and philosophy and music, with not a single weapons laboratory to be found. The reports showed hospitals and healing centers and places of meditation, because the humans had apparently decided to spend their captivity becoming enlightened instead of dangerous. The reports showed no warships, no weapons platforms, no military academies, no defense installations, nothing that any civilization would need to protect itself from conquest. "They are cattle," Supreme Commander Vavenol declared. "And cattle do not fight when the slaughter comes. They simply stand there and accept their fate." Which is exactly what the humans will do when our fleet arrives. The War Council laughed again, and the planning continued. And the Concord Armada began its preparations for what everyone expected to be the easiest conquest in galactic history. But not everyone was laughing in a small archive room far from the halls of power. A young historian named Torvax was reading very old records. And the more he read, the more frightened he became. Torvax was of the Kelvari, a species that had joined the Concord only 500 years ago after their own conquest. And he had always been curious about the other species that the Concord had protected over the millennia. So when he heard about the planned extinction of humanity, he decided to research their history. What he found made his blood run cold. The records from 3,000 years ago painted a very different picture of humanity than the intelligence reports showed. These records spoke of a species that had nearly destroyed itself not once but multiple times, using weapons of such terrible power that they had made parts of their own planet uninhabitable. These records contained images of something the humans called war, and Torvax had to stop and take deep breaths several times, because he had never seen such organized violence, such efficient destruction, such creative brutality. These records described human concepts like total war and mutual assured destruction and scorched earth tactics, and each one was more horrifying than the last. But the thing that frightened Torvax the most was not what the humans had done to each other. It was what they had done when they stopped. The records showed that humans had been on the verge of expanding into space with a military fleet that, even with their primitive technology, would have been difficult for the Concord to defeat without significant losses. The records showed that the Concord's ultimatum had come at exactly the right moment, when humanity was strong enough to be a threat but not quite strong enough to win a war. Records showed that the humans had been given a choice: sign the covenant or die, and the records showed that they had signed. But Torvax was a historian, and he knew something about species that were forced to submit to superior power. They never forgot. They never stopped wanting to be free. And if they were smart, and the records suggested that humans were very, very smart, they never stopped preparing for the day when they might have another chance. Torvax tried to bring his concerns to the War Council, but they dismissed him as a young fool who had read too many old stories. The humans of 3,000 years ago are not the humans of today, Admiral Zethkon told him dismissively. They have been watched every day for 30 centuries, and we know exactly what they are: soft and weak and incapable of violence. But what if they have been hiding Torvax asked, and the Admiral laughed so hard that Torvax could feel the vibrations through the floor. Hiding what? The Admiral demanded. Hiding weapons that our sensors cannot detect. Hiding ships that our observers cannot see. Hiding an entire military infrastructure beneath our very noses for 3,000 years. Do you know how impossible that would be? Torvax did not have an answer, so he was sent away. And the war preparations continued, but he could not let it go. He dug deeper into the archives, searching for anything that might explain his unease. And finally, he found a small notation in a report from one of the observers who had been stationed on Earth 1,000 years ago. The notation was brief, almost an afterthought, and it said simply, "Observation continues to show no military development, but it should be noted that all human children receive mandatory physical training that exceeds the fitness requirements of most Concord military forces. Purpose listed as health and recreation, but this seems excessive." Torvax felt his heart beating faster as he searched for more notations like this one. He found dozens. Human universities offer courses in game theory and strategic simulation that appear to be purely academic but contain information applicable to military tactics. Human manufacturing facilities demonstrate capabilities that could easily be converted to weapons production if needed. Human population shows unusual physical fitness for a species with no military average strength, and reaction time exceeds Concord baselines. Human children play games involving simulated combat with remarkable skill and intensity. Each notation was small. Each observation was easily dismissed on its own. But when Torvax put them all together, he saw a pattern that terrified him. The humans had not become soft. They had become invisible. Everything they did had two purposes, one that they showed to the Concord observers, and one that they kept hidden. Their physical education was military training. Their strategic games were war simulations. Their manufacturing capabilities were weapons factories waiting to be activated, and their recreational activities were keeping an entire population ready for combat at a moment's notice. Torvax sent a desperate message to Ambassador Kethra, who was still en route back to the Concord homeworld. And his message contained only one question. Ask them what playing possum means. Kethra received the message and found it strange. But she was troubled enough by her own memories of the meeting that she decided to return to Earth for one final observation before the invasion began. She landed in a human city this time, walking through the streets without her guards because the intelligence reports said there was nothing to fear. And at first, everything seemed exactly as the reports described. Children played in parks, their laughter ringing through the air. Artists painted pictures and musicians played instruments on street corners. People sat in cafes and talked about philosophy and art and the meaning of existence. It all looked so peaceful, so harmless, so exactly what a species that had given up on violence would look like. But Kethra was a trained observer, and she had spent her entire life reading the body language of species who were trying to hide things from her. And the more she watched, the more wrong things she noticed. The children playing in the parks were not just playing, they were moving in formations, coordinating their movements, practicing maneuvers that looked like games, that felt like drills. Artists and musicians were fit in ways that artists and musicians should not be, with muscles that suggested daily training and hands that were steady in ways that spoke of practiced precision. And the adults, every single adult she passed, moved with an efficiency that bordered on mechanical, their eyes tracking her position without ever seeming to look directly at her. She stopped to watch an old man tending a garden, and she noticed that his hands moved with perfect control, never wasting a motion, never hesitating, working the soil with the same precision a soldier would use to maintain a weapon. That was when she understood what Torvax had been trying to tell her. The humans had not forgotten how to be dangerous. They had simply learned how to hide it, and for 3,000 years, while the Concord watched and laughed and called them cattle, the humans had been waiting and preparing and turning every single one of their people into something that the Concord had never seen before. Kethra left the planet that day, and she did not file another report because she did not know how to explain what she had seen without sounding as mad as young Torvax, but she knew, in the deepest part of her being, that the Concord was about to make the worst mistake in its 100,000-year history. And she knew that when the humans finally showed what they had been hiding, the galaxy would never be the same. Director Yuki Tanaka sent a message to Ambassador Kethra 2 days after the declaration of war, and the message was an invitation to return to Earth for what Tanaka called a historical presentation that we believe the Concord should see before any further decisions are made. Kethra accepted, partly because she was curious and partly because she was afraid. And this time, she brought a full diplomatic escort, including 3 military advisors who were supposed to observe and report back to the High Command when they arrived at Earth Station 1. Director Tanaka was waiting for them with the same calm smile she had worn during their first meeting. "Thank you for coming, Ambassador," she said, and her voice was warm and welcoming, as if she were greeting old friends, rather than representatives of the force that had promised to exterminate her entire species. "We have prepared something special for you, and we believe it will change your understanding of humanity in important ways." Kethra's military advisors scanned everything with their equipment and found nothing dangerous. So they followed the humans deeper into the station, passing through corridors that seemed perfectly ordinary until they reached a large chamber with a massive display screen covering one entire wall. "Please sit," Director Tanaka said, gesturing to comfortable chairs that had been arranged facing the screen. "What you are about to see is the truth about what humanity has been doing for the past 3,000 years. The lights dimmed, and the screen came to life. The first image showed Earth as it had been 3,000 years ago. A blue and green world surrounded by primitive satellites and early space stations, and a voice began to speak, a calm, measured human voice that narrated the presentation. When the covenant of stillness was forced upon humanity, our leaders faced an impossible choice: submit or die. They chose to submit, but they also made a secret decision that would shape every aspect of human civilization for the next 30 centuries. The image changed to show the signing of the covenant. Humans in formal clothing standing across from representatives of the Concord. And Kethra recognized the same expressions of smug superiority on the alien faces that she had worn so many times herself. The decision was simple. The voice continued. "We would sign the covenant, and we would appear to follow every rule. And we would never again openly develop military technology, but in secret, in the shadows, in every hidden corner of our civilization. We would prepare for the day when the covenant would be broken." The next image made Kethra's heart stop. It showed a university campus, the same kind of peaceful educational institution that the Concord had observed thousands of times. But then the image zoomed beneath the ground to reveal massive underground facilities filled with scientists working on weapons technology that the Concord had never seen. Our universities taught philosophy and art and music on the surface, the voice explained. But beneath them, our greatest minds worked on weapons research that advanced far beyond anything the Concord possesses. We had 3,000 years, Ambassador, and we did not waste a single day. The image changed again, showing a hospital. Our hospitals healed the sick and injured. And this was true, but they also developed biological augmentation programs that had enhanced every human being born in the last 2,000 years. Director Tanaka leaned toward Kethra and spoke softly. "Every human you have ever seen, Ambassador, is stronger than your average soldier. Faster than your best athletes, and smarter than your most gifted scientists. We did not breed warriors. We became warriors, all of us, every single one. The presentation continued, and each revelation was worse than the last. The farms that covered Earth's continents were not just farms, they were testing grounds for terraforming technology that could strip a planet of life or seed a dead world with ecosystems in a matter of years. The art galleries and museums were covers for manufacturing complexes that stretched miles beneath the surface, producing everything humanity would need for a war of liberation. The philosophers were strategists who had spent centuries analyzing Concord tactics and developing counter-strategies for every possible scenario. The poets were propaganda specialists who had crafted messages designed to inspire humanity and demoralize any enemy. The athletes were soldiers, and every sport was secretly a form of combat training. We studied you, Director Tanaka said, and her voice was still calm, but now there was something else beneath it. Not anger, not hatred, but something that might have been satisfaction. For 3,000 years, we watched your observers watching us, and we learned everything: your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses, your blind spots, your assumptions. She smiled that same unsettling smile. You assumed we were broken because we followed your rules. You never considered that we might be following your rules precisely so you would not see what we were really doing. Cathara's military advisors were speaking rapidly into their communication devices, trying to report what they were seeing to the high command. But Cathara could not look away from the screen. Presentation showed the next phase of humanity's secret plan: the recruitment of all ice 12 other species, all of them young races that had been conquered or oppressed by the Concord, had been contacted by human agents over the centuries, and they had all agreed to join what humanity called the New Dawn Coalition. We are not alone in wanting freedom, Director Tanaka explained, and we are not alone in preparing for this day. But the final revelation was the one that truly broke Cathara's understanding of what was possible. Director Tanaka stood and walked to a different door, one that Cathara had not noticed before, and she gestured for the ambassador to follow. Come, she said. There is one more thing you need to see. They walked through the door and into a lift that descended for what felt like hours, going down and down and down into depths that should not have existed beneath an orbital station. When the lift finally stopped and the doors opened, Cathara stepped out onto a viewing platform and looked down into an abyss that stole her breath, stretching below her, filling a cavern so vast that she could not see its edges. Was a fleet of warships, not dozens, not hundreds, 12,000 ships, each one gleaming with technology that Cathara did not recognize, arranged in perfect formations that extended into the darkness. We built this beneath every major city on Earth, Director Tanaka said, standing beside her. And we built similar facilities on every moon, every asteroid, every hidden corner of our system for 3,000 years, Ambassador. We built. Cathara could not speak. Your covenant forbade us from having warships, Tanaka continued. So we made sure you never saw them, but they were always here, waiting, growing in number and power with every passing year. She turned to face Cathara directly, and her smile was gone now, replaced by an expression of absolute certainty. You spent 3,000 years thinking you had caged wolves and turned them into sheep, but wolves do not forget what they are, Ambassador, and they do not forget how to hunt. She gestured at the vast fleet below. We are not the broken species you thought we were. We are the species that used every moment of captivity to become something more dangerous than you ever imagined. Why are you showing me this? Cathara finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Because we want you to tell the Concord, Director Tanaka replied. We want them to know what is coming, not because we fear them, but because we hope they will choose to surrender rather than fight. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost gentle. We do not want to destroy the Concorde. Ambassador, we want to free the galaxy from it. And we would prefer to do that with as little death as possible. Kethra looked at the fleet below, and she understood that the Concorde had already lost. They had lost 3,000 years ago, when they chose to cage humanity instead of destroy them, and now the galaxy was about to learn what happened when the cage was finally opened. The Concorde Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system like a swarm of metal locusts. 5,000 warships arranged in perfect attack formation, carrying enough firepower to reduce every planet in the system to Ash Supreme Commander Vethanal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and looked down at the tiny blue dot in the distance that was humanity's homeworld. He had received Ambassador Kethra's frantic reports about underground fleets and secret preparations, but he had dismissed them as enemy propaganda designed to create fear and hesitation. The humans are desperate, he had told his war council, and desperate prey tells lies to frighten predators. We have watched them for 3,000 years, and we know exactly what they are capable of, which is nothing, his fleet commanders had agreed, and the invasion had launched on schedule now. As the Armada moved toward Earth at attack speed, Vethanal allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be his legacy, the final conquest of the last species that had ever dared to resist the Concorde's authority. Supreme Commander, his sensor officer called out, and there was something wrong with his voice. We are detecting energy signatures ahead. From the human stations? Vethanal asked dismissively. Their orbital platforms are civilian facilities. They pose no threat. No. Supreme Commander, the sensor officer replied, and his voice was shaking now. The signatures are coming from everywhere, from behind every moon, from within the asteroid belt. From beneath the orbital platforms, there are thousands of them. Before Vethanal could respond, the human fleet appeared. They did not emerge slowly or hesitantly like prey, hoping to bluff a predator. They burst out of their hiding places like predators, who had been waiting for exactly this moment. 12,000 warships that moved with a coordination and speed that the Concorde had never seen, but that was not the worst part. The worst part was that they were not alone alongside. The human fleet came ships of 12 other designs, vessels from the species that the Concorde had conquered or oppressed over the millennia, all of them flying under a common banner, a rising sun with 12 stars, the symbol of the New Dawn Coalition. All ships, battle formation, Vethanal shouted. But his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears, because he was beginning to understand that Ambassador Kethra had not been spreading propaganda she had been trying to warn them. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Concorde forces fought as they had always fought, using tactics that had worked for 100,000 years, moving in predictable patterns that had crushed every enemy they had ever faced. But the humans had spent 3,000 years studying those patterns, every move the Concorde made. The humans had already anticipated every tactic they tried. The humans had already developed to counter every formation they attempted. The humans had already simulated and defeated 1,000,000 times in their strategic computers within the first hour. A third of the Concorde fleet was disabled, not destroyed. Disableed Vethanal watched in confusion as human weapons struck his ships with surgical precision, targeting engines and weapon systems and communication arrays while leaving life support and crew quarters untouched. They are not trying to kill us, his tactical officer reported with disbelief in his voice. They are trying to capture us. It made no sense. No species had ever shown mercy in war, especially not to enemies who had promised to exterminate them. But the humans were not like any species the Concorde had ever faced by the third hour. Vethanol's flagship was surrounded human boarding craft attached to the eternal judgment like parasites. And moments later, the airlocks were breached and human soldiers poured into the ship Vethanol had expected savage warriors, crazed with bloodlust after 3,000 years of captivity. But what he saw was something far more frightening. The human soldiers moved like machines, their coordination perfect, their actions precise, their faces calm and focused as they swept through the ship. They did not shoot to kill unless absolutely necessary. They did not rage or scream or seek revenge. They simply neutralized every defender with terrifying efficiency, using weapons that stunned rather than killed, clearing room after room without taking a single life they did not have to take. When they reached the bridge, Vethanol was the last defender standing, and he raised his personal weapon toward the human who led the boarding party. She was a woman with dark skin and silver scars crossing her face, and she wore the insignia of a general, and when she looked at him, her eyes held no hatred. "Supreme Commander Vethanol," she said, and her voice was steady. "I am General Okonkwo of the Human Defense Force. Your ship is captured. Your fleet is defeated, and you are now a prisoner of the New Dawn Coalition." "Then kill me," Vethanol demanded, because that was what he would have done to her. Finish this and be done with it. But General Okonkwo did something that Vethanol did not expect. She lowered her weapon. "No," she said simply. "Why not?" He demanded, and he could hear his own confusion turning to something that might have been anger. "We came here to destroy you. We declared war on your people. We promised to exterminate every human alive. Why would you show mercy to us?" General Okonkwo gestured to one of her soldiers, who came forward carrying water and a medical kit. "Tend to his wounds," she ordered. And the soldier moved to help Vethanol, even as he stared at them in disbelief. 3,000 years ago, General Okonkwo said, "The Concord could have destroyed humanity. You had the power, you had the justification. You had every reason to wipe us out before we became a threat." She met his eyes directly. "But you did not. You chose to cage us instead, to give us a chance at survival, even if it was a survival without freedom. That was not mercy," Vethanol protested. "That was control." "Perhaps," General Okonkwo agreed. "But it was still a choice. You could have killed us, and you chose not to." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "We remember that choice, Supreme Commander, even if you meant it as cruelty. We remember that you let us live. So what happens now?" Vethanol asked, and he did not recognize his own voice anymore. "Now we give you the same choice you gave us 3,000 years ago." General Okonkwo replied, "You can continue to fight and die, or you can surrender and live, but unlike the Concord, we will not put you in a cage." She gestured toward the viewport, where the broken remnants of the Concord fleet drifted helplessly in space, surrounded by human ships that could destroy them at any moment, but chose not to. "We did not prepare for 3,000 years because we wanted revenge. Supreme Commander, we prepared because we wanted to be free, and we wanted to show the galaxy that there was another way." She offered him her hand, not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as an invitation. "The war is over. You lost the moment you decided to attack us, because we have been ready for this day since before you were born." She smiled, and it was the same smile that Director Tanaka had worn. But now Vethanol understood what it meant. It was not the smile of predators about to feast. It was the smile of people who had finally been given the chance to prove who they really were. "Welcome to the new era. Supreme Commander, humanity has many things to teach you, and we have 3,000 years of lessons prepared." Vethanol looked at her hand for a long moment, and then, slowly, he took it. The Great Hall of the Concord had stood for 100,000 years as a symbol of galactic order, a place where the elder races had gathered to decide the fate of civilizations, and now it was filled with beings who had never been allowed to enter before Director Yuki Tanaka walked down the central aisle with representatives of the New Dawn Coalition flanking her. And as she passed the seats that had once held the masters of the galaxy, she saw expressions she had never expected to see on alien faces: confusion, fear, and something that might have been hope. The elder species had been gathered here not as prisoners, but as witnesses, brought to see the announcement that would reshape everything they had ever known. At the front of the hall, Ambassador Kethra waited with the surviving leaders of the Concord, including Supreme Commander Vethanal, whose wounds had been healed by human doctors, and whose mind was still struggling to understand how completely his world had changed. Director Tanaka reached the speaking platform and turned to face the assembly. 3,000 years ago, she began, and her voice carried through the vast hall without effort. Humanity was given an ultimatum: submit or die, and we submitted because we were not yet strong enough to choose another path. She paused, letting her words sink in. For 30 centuries, we lived in a cage of your making, watched and mocked and pitied by the galaxy, called the quiet ones because we had been silenced, called the tamed apes because you believed you had broken us. Her eyes moved across the assembly, meeting the gazes of species who had believed themselves superior to humanity. You were wrong. A murmur ran through the hall. But Tanaka continued. We used every day of those 3,000 years to prepare for this moment, not for revenge, not for conquest, but for freedom. And now we stand before you, not as the broken prisoners you thought we were, but as the liberators we always intended to become. Supreme Commander Vethanal spoke from his seat, his voice heavy with the weight of defeat. If you mean to destroy us, then do it. Do not torture us with speeches. Director Tanaka shook her head. We have not come to destroy anyone. Supreme Commander, we have come to offer something that the Concord never offered to anyone else. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the hall. This is our proposal for a new galactic alliance. We call it the Galactic Compact, and it is built on principles that the Concord never considered. The display showed a symbol, a circle of stars, each one equal in size, each one connected to all the others. In the Compact, there are no elder races and no lesser species. There are only members, and every member has an equal voice. Impossible, one of the elder species representatives declared. The young races are not ready for such responsibility. They need guidance. They need control. No, Director Tanaka said firmly. They need freedom, and they need the chance to prove themselves without the weight of the Concord's boot on their necks. She gestured to the 12 species who stood with her, representatives of the New Dawn Coalition. These species were conquered by the Concord, oppressed for centuries, treated as servants and resources, and yet when humanity called for allies, they answered, and they fought beside us not because we forced them, but because they believed in what we offered. A Kelvari representative stepped forward, Torvax, the historian who had tried to warn the Concord about humanity's true nature. The humans approached my people a century ago, he said, and his voice was steady despite the weight of every eye in the hall upon him. They did not come with threats or demands. They came with a question. Do you want to be free? He looked at the elder species. We had never been asked that question before. No one had ever cared what we wanted, but the humans cared. And they offered us a place in a new order where we would be treated as equals. Another coalition representative spoke, and another, each one telling a similar story, humanity reaching out across the centuries, the building alliances based on mutual respect rather than domination. When the last testimony was finished, Director Tanaka spoke again. The Concord is dissolved as of this moment. Your fleets are captured. Your infrastructure is under our control. Your ability to wage war is gone. She let that reality settle over the assembly before continuing. But we do not intend to replace one empire with another. We did not spend 3,000 years preparing just so we could become the very thing we fought against. She met the eyes of Supreme Commander Vethanol. You have a choice. You can join the Galactic Compact as equal members, working alongside the species you once conquered, building a galaxy based on cooperation rather than control, or you can refuse. And we will leave you to rebuild on your own while the rest of us move forward without you. Why? Vethanol asked. And the question seemed to contain everything he could not understand about humanity. Why show mercy? Why not punish us for what we did to you? Why not make us suffer as we made you suffer? It was the question that everyone in the hall wanted answered. Director Tanaka was quiet for a moment. And when she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been. 3,000 years is a long time. Supreme Commander, long enough for hatred to grow. Long enough for bitterness to consume everything good in a civilization. She looked at her hands. Steady and calm, every generation of humans had a choice. We could let the anger and resentment define us, or we could hold on to the hope that someday we would have the chance to show the galaxy who we really were. She raised her head. We chose hope, not because it was easy, but because we believed that if we ever gained the power to destroy our enemies, we wanted to be the kind of people who would choose not to. Kethra spoke from her place among the Concord delegation, her voice uncertain in a way it had never been. The four. How did you do it? How did you hold on to hope for so long? Director Tanaka smiled. And it was not the unsettling smile of the predator, but the warm smile of someone who had finally been understood, because we remembered who we wanted to be, not who you forced us to become. She looked out at the assembly one final time. The Concord taught us patience. And we are grateful for that lesson. You taught us to plan for the long term, to prepare carefully, to hide our true intentions. Those were valuable skills. Her smile widened. But you never taught us to hate, and that is the one lesson we refused to learn. She stepped back from the speaking platform. The vote for the Galactic Compact will take place in one standard cycle. Every species is invited to participate, elder and young alike, because in this new era, every voice matters. As she walked back down the aisle with her coalition allies, Kethra watched her go. The human had been right. Kethra realized 3,000 years in a cage had not broken. Humanity had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that had every reason for vengeance, but chose compassion instead. A species that had been treated as prisoners, but emerged as liberators. The cage was finally open, and the wolves had become something far more dangerous than predators. They had become teachers, and as the elder species slowly rose from their seats and began to discuss the impossible offer that humanity had made, Kethra understood that the galaxy would never be the same. The 3,000-year peace had shattered, but what rose from its ashes was not war, it was freedom and humanity. The quiet ones, the species that had smiled in the face of their own extinction, stood ready to share that freedom with everyone who was willing to reach for it. The stars had never looked brighter.